The final stretch of this production undoubtedly sparked extensive debate and navigated a challenging path throughout its 8 installments. However, upon conclusion, the work makes a notable effort to close the seasonal narrative in a relatively satisfying manner. If you have already watched the definitive chapter and seek to delve deeper into its meaning, settle in and let us examine together everything that transpired at the end. Of course, there will be plot revelations, numerous revelations, but let us see what truly happened. Everything converged toward this moment. Homelander's fixation on being an omnipotent deity and Butcher's relentless pursuit of a future without enhanced beings led us here. Therefore, it should not be surprising that the series finale revolves around these 2 thematic axes. Eliminating Homelander was, from the start, the only path through which this narrative could conclude. Or at least that was always the goal that drove the entire journey of Butcher and the team throughout these 5 seasons. All the suffering, the losses, and the ethically questionable choices had a single purpose: to eliminate the most powerful individual on the planet. Just as they had planned, Kimiko represented the only genuine instrument capable of stopping Homelander. But after how events concluded in the previous installment, nothing guaranteed the plan would operate correctly. Chaos had already invaded everything, and the definitive confrontation inside the White House feels precisely that way. Desperate, aggressive, and completely out of control. When the crucial moment arrives, the young woman attempts to use her abilities against the leader of the 7, but she does not succeed. More specifically, she fails to activate them. For an instant, she appears immobilized, unable to unleash her new powers. And it is then that Frenchie appears as a hallucination or perhaps an emotional manifestation within her psyche. It is a brief moment, but immensely relevant, because it represents what always gave her strength: affection, humanity, and the desire to protect those she considers family. Thanks to this, she finally manages to unleash her new abilities against Homelander, against Butcher, and against young Ryan. And although at first the scene may seem confusing, everything indicates that the young woman succeeds in removing the compound from Homelander's organism, completely stripping him of his capabilities. For the first time in the entire series, the ultimate symbol of fear is reduced to something he never imagined being: an ordinary man. And this is where the truly transcendent aspect of this ending occurs, because for the protagonist, it was never just about eliminating his enemy. It was about watching him crumble, seeing him defeated physically, mentally, and emotionally. After years terrorizing the planet, manipulating individuals, and believing himself an untouchable deity, the antagonist ends up completely shattered, begging for his existence, while the entire planet witnesses the moment thanks to the television broadcast. It is an absolute disgrace for a character whose greatest obsession was always public validation. And yet, the hunter does not stop. After everything lost, after Becca, after the deaths and the resentment that consumed him for years, he finally executes what he promised from the beginning. He ends his nemesis once and for all. Although this elimination differs greatly from the comics, honestly I believe it works much better for the series. Instead of transforming the ending into a simple epic battle filled with destruction, the episode decides to focus on something far more interesting: the psychological downfall of the villain. Throughout much of the chapter, we watch him sink into a spiral of desperation as he loses control over absolutely everything. He can no longer intimidate, he can no longer dominate, and worst of all for him, he can no longer inspire fear. This makes his ending far more painful. And yet, the production does not set aside spectacle. The final moments between the protagonist and his enemy are brutal, tense, and visually striking. The help of young Ryan and Kimiko proves completely indispensable to defeat the most powerful enhanced being of all time, making clear that the antagonist never fell by the strength of a single person, but by all the harm he caused to those around him. Although eliminating the villain marks the end of the planet's greatest threat, for Butcher, it was never enough. And that is precisely the most tragic aspect of his character, because even after achieving what consumed him for years, the emptiness and resentment inside him remain intact. With his nemesis out of the way, the protagonist does not wish to stop there. He is convinced that as long as enhanced beings exist, the planet will never be safe. That is why he decides to use the virus to exterminate them definitively. Or, well, that was his plan. It is a tough moment because young Huey immediately understands what is happening. The young man tries to make him see reason. He recalls everything lost, everything they were supposedly trying to protect, but words no longer work. Butcher is too broken, too consumed by resentment and the idea that the end justifies any means. And ultimately, the young man makes the most difficult decision of the entire series to stop his mentor. After a brief confrontation, the young man shoots him. Butcher barely reacts, and there is no real anger in his response. There is no hatred toward his pupil. In fact, the final conversation between them feels strangely sincere and even sad, because deep down, it seems that a part of the protagonist wanted someone to stop him. For years he advanced, driven solely by vengeance, destroying himself little by little in the process. And although he would never have been able to stop himself by his own will, he understands that his companion forces him to do what is right when he no longer could. That is right, my friends. Butcher also dies. It is a devastating closure for their bond. The protagonist passes away, not as a hero, but not entirely as a villain either. He dies as someone consumed by resentment, unable to escape it until the final second. And perhaps that is precisely why his ending also works within the cruel and pessimistic tone of the production. And speaking of endings, another character who finally finds his destiny is the Deep. Loved by some and detested by many others, the character had spent years surviving against all odds. After countless embarrassments, failures, and absurd moments, many wondered how on earth this individual, so pathetic and at the same time so dangerous, was still alive. And honestly, I believe the series gives him a rather appropriate ending. After finally confronting Annie and having this long-awaited reckoning, the character ends up being thrown into the sea. But far from representing a refuge for him, the ocean becomes the place of his demise when several sharks end up devouring him. A completely ironic conclusion. Although the 8th episode of the 5th season of this production brings the series to an end, that does not mean the franchise is finished. The finale features the return of executive Stan Edgar, which is terrifying because that individual somehow survives everything. However, this resurgence alone suggests that Vought International is not collapsing, and this fits perfectly with the image of this universe. Then we have Soldier Boy, who instead of completely resolving his story arc, his story, the series has decided to reserve his fate for the production Vought Rising. To a certain extent, this feels both fair and unfair at once. We wish to know what the future holds for Soldier Boy. At the same time, the 5th season of this production already had much to do with multiple storylines to resolve. For example, at the end, Annie and Huey are expecting a baby. Mother's Milk gets married. Kimiko and Ryan seem to have a happy ending. However, even though the main series has concluded, rest assured that this universe will not disappear soon. So, was the ending of this production good or bad? Well, I consider it depends on who you ask, but at least I believe it was positive, although it will probably be one of those conclusions that divides fans. Because this series was never a production about heroes saving the planet. It never dealt with hope, justice, or happy endings in the traditional style. From the first episode, the work made clear that this universe was broken, corrupt, and dominated by individuals consumed by power, ego, and violence. That is why the ending had to feel uncomfortable, cruel, and even a bit bitter, and I believe that is precisely where its greatest success lies. The villain's fall does not occur during a glorious battle where good triumphs in epic fashion. It happens when he finally loses what truly made him powerful, the fear he generated in others, and the adoration of the people. It is an ending far more psychological than physical, and honestly, it fits perfectly with everything the character represents. The same happens with Butcher. Many expected to see him sacrifice himself heroically or find some type of absolute redemption. But the series understands something important. Some people simply remain too destroyed by hatred. Butcher manages to fulfill his mission, yes, but the price was losing himself completely along the way, and that makes his ending far more tragic and human. Now, I perfectly understand why some people might detest this closure. The episode, the season in general, makes very strange decisions. There are very rushed moves, and some secondary characters who could have had more development did not receive it. But even so, I believe it achieves something far more important, remaining faithful to the essence of the series until the very last moment. And with this production reaching its end, the universe not only stops, but moves toward its roots. The platform has already confirmed that Vought Rising is a prequel set in the 1950s starring a younger soldier boy, still without the corrosive cynicism with which we have come to know him. And this is not a promise for the future. Filming has already concluded and the production seems solid, at least on paper. There is a varied cast, post-war aesthetics, and the promise to reveal the dark origins of the corporation that poisoned society in the first place. But of course, many questions arise. Is more of this universe really needed after 5 seasons? 2 of Jen and 1 of Diabolical. Well, more or less. We can argue many ideas here, but the truth is that Soldier Boy, the corrupt version of Captain America, was the most surprising element of the 3rd season of this production. A rough, macho gentleman, capable of making anyone uncomfortable, maintaining enough charisma for the viewer to want to understand how he got to where he is. The temporal setting that Vought Rising occupies is interesting because it takes place at the height of American patriotism in the post-war period. The creation of the Seven as an institution, the rise of the corporation as a power parallel to the government. There is plenty of material to spare to keep the political edge of the series quite sharp and relevant in these times. We will have the opportunity to observe how Soldier Boy turned fascism into a trademark decades before Homelander perfected this product. Another argument in favor is that the 5th season of this production has dedicated considerable time to preparing the ground for Vought Rising with flashbacks and references that consolidate Soldier Boy's profile without the need for an entire origin story. But not everything is positive. The final season of this production has been, according to general critical reception, the most irregular of the 5. Not because it was a failure at all, no, but because the balance between political satire and violent chaos has proven difficult to maintain as reality surpasses fiction. The cancellation of Jen is also an eloquent datum. While the spin-off had its own virtues, it did not achieve the numbers necessary for the Amazon Prime Video platform. This is what constitutes a failure in the expanded universe that indicates a certain exhaustion. In the end, whether Vought Rising deserves to exist or not will depend on the kind of product it is. If it aims to use the 1950s as a distorting mirror of the present with the same precision with which this series uses superheroes to talk about corporations and media, there will always be an interesting place to stay hooked. If instead the production limits itself to being an action prequel with period aesthetics featuring Soldier Boy doing violent things in a post-war context, it could become something totally generic. Not every memorable character can carry their own series, but one never knows. The only thing we can hope for is to see Soldier Boy again in this prequel sequel. And since we are talking about the future, what on earth happened with the boys' Mexico? Well, for the moment, there are no official details about the plot of this new series from the Amazon Prime Video platform. However, creator Eric Kripke commented recently in an interview that indeed, this production in Mexico is a reality and will take place after Season 5 of the original series. This new story will develop in Mexico City, and according to him, it will be very entertaining. He has already read the first draft of the script, and everyone is very satisfied with what has been done. But tell me, what did you think of the ending of this story? What did you perceive about the closure of this production? What are your expectations for the future of this expanded universe?